No, I think it's a great news. By the way, there were already some rumors, but this time it's official and we have a time frame. That Mitsubishi relationship with Nissan and with Renault is very smooth and is very effective.
And particularly entry-level crossover are growing in the market.
What if I told you one of the world's biggest car companies, trusted by millions, driven by generations, was once just weeks away from complete collapse? Not because people stopped needing cars, but because the company forgot how to make people feel something when they drove them. This is the story of a brand that went from dominating roads across continents to losing billions, identity, and confidence. And then, almost unbelievably, it was brought back from the brink by someone who wasn't even part of its culture. How does a giant like Nissan fall so hard? And more importantly, who dares to rebuild it from scratch? For decades, Nissan wasn't just another car company, it was a symbol of Japanese precision, pride, and progress. Walk through the streets of Japan and you'd feel it instantly. This quiet but powerful connection between people and the brand. For many families, Nissan wasn't just a workplace, it was a legacy. Grandfathers, fathers, and sons all working under the same name, carrying forward a shared identity that went beyond paychecks and production lines. And that emotional connection wasn't built overnight. Hidden away in carefully preserved warehouses were the roots of that legacy. Machines from another era, cars from the 1930s when everything was handcrafted, when only a few hundred units were made each year. Back then, Nissan wasn't chasing volume, it was building character. These early models, sold under the Datsun name, represented something raw and authentic, a company finding its voice in a rapidly changing world. Then came the explosion. The 1950s, 60s, and 70s transformed everything. Car ownership surged across Asia, multiplying at a pace no one had seen before. And Nissan, it rode that wave perfectly. Affordable, reliable, and built to last, its cars became a natural choice for the rising middle class. This wasn't luxury, it was accessibility done right. A car you could actually afford with your annual salary, a machine that worked as hard as you did. But Nissan didn't stop at practicality. On racetracks, it proved something else entirely, that it could compete and win. Victories weren't just trophies, they were statements. Nissan wasn't just building cars for the average driver. It was building machines that could dominate under pressure. And that reputation crossed oceans. In the United States, the brand took on a new personality: fun, tough, and dependable. And then came an unexpected boost: Hollywood. Actor Paul Newman didn't just endorse Nissan, he embodied it. Speed, confidence, performance, it all aligned. Suddenly, Nissan wasn't just practical, it was desirable. Everything was working. Strong brand, global presence, loyal customers, emotional connection, and ironically, that's exactly where the problem began. Because when a company becomes too comfortable, it stops questioning itself. By the late 80s and early 90s, something subtle but dangerous started to happen. Nissan's cars were everywhere, but they were no longer exciting. The bold designs that once turned heads were replaced with safe, predictable shapes. Instead of standing out, Nissan began blending in. At first, it didn't seem like a crisis. Sales didn't collapse overnight. That's the tricky part about decline in large companies. It doesn't hit like a sudden crash. It creeps in slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until it's too late to ignore. Inside Nissan, the warning signs were already there. Design, the very thing that once gave the brand its personality, was losing its edge. Cars became boxy, generic, and forgettable. You could drive one, and no one would look twice. And in an industry where perception is everything, that's a silent disaster. But the real issue wasn't just design, it was mindset. Instead of asking, what do customers truly want? Nissan began asking, how many options can we offer? The strategy seemed logical on paper. Give people endless choices, and you'll satisfy everyone. Different trims, interiors, configurations, almost infinite combination. But in reality, it created chaos. Production became more complex, costs skyrocketed, supply chains became tangled, and ironically, instead of pleasing customers, it overwhelmed them. It was like walking into a restaurant with 120 items on the menu, too many choices, no clear identity. And while Nissan was busy complicating things, its competitors were simplifying and evolving. Toyota and Honda were moving fast, especially when a new trend began to take over the roads, the SUV. Bigger, more versatile, more aligned with changing lifestyles. It wasn't just a car, it was a shift in how people wanted to live and drive. But Nissan hesitated. They dismissed SUVs as a passing trend, a temporary spike that didn't deserve immediate attention. And by the time they realized it wasn't a fad, they were already behind. That hesitation cost them more than just market share. It cost them confidence. Inside the company, uncertainty started spreading. Decisions became reactive instead of strategic. Instead of leading the market, Nissan began chasing it, copying competitors, adjusting late, always one step behind. And once a company loses confidence, everything starts to unravel. By 1993, the numbers made it official. For the first time in over 50 years, Nissan reported a loss, over $1 billion. And it didn't stop there. The losses doubled the following year. Then came plant closures, layoffs, cuts that shook the very people who once felt proud to be part of something bigger. And the customers, they noticed too. Loyal fans who once admired Nissan for its flair and performance began drifting away. The excitement was gone. The identity was fading. What was once a brand you felt proud to drive had become just another option on the road. Even die-hard enthusiasts couldn't ignore it. People who had spent years modifying, upgrading, and loving their Nissan cars looked at the newer models and felt nothing. No emotion, no connection, just practicality, and not in a good way. Because a car isn't just a machine, it's an experience, a statement, a feeling. And Nissan had lost that completely. Behind all of this was a deeper, more structural problem. The company had become overly focused on engineering, on the technical side of things. And while innovation is important, it became disconnected from the customer experience. Engineers were building what they thought was impressive, not what people actually desired. It was internal satisfaction over external relevance. And that disconnect showed up everywhere. Sales dropped, costs increased, global operations became fragmented, with different regions barely communicating with each other. Nissan had grown so large, it had lost control of itself. Debt kept piling up, reaching over $20 billion. At this point, it wasn't just a struggling company anymore. It was a company running out of time. By the late 90s, the situation had reached a breaking point. Nissan wasn't just struggling anymore. It was on the edge of collapse. Banks had started pulling back. Confidence, both inside and outside the company, had almost vanished. And for a brand that once symbolized national pride, this was unthinkable. So Nissan did something no one expected. It looked outside Japan for help. In 1999, French automaker Renault stepped in and acquired a major stake in the company. And with that deal came a man who would change everything. Carlos Ghosn, an outsider, a foreigner, someone who didn't belong to Nissan's deeply rooted culture. And maybe that's exactly why he was the right person for the job. Because he wasn't emotionally tied to the past. From day one, Ghosn made it clear this wasn't about small fixes. This was survival. Factories were shut down. Thousands of jobs were cut. Costs were aggressively reduced. Painful decisions, but necessary ones. And while many feared resistance, something unexpected happened. People started to listen. Because for the first time in years, there was clarity, a direction, a sense that someone actually understood what needed to be done. But Ghosn didn't just cut costs, he rebuilt belief. He broke traditional hierarchy, encouraged open communication, and brought together teams that had never collaborated before. Engineers, designers, marketers, all finally working toward the same goal. Nissan wasn't just restructuring, it was rediscovering itself. And then came the real shift. The focus went back to what truly mattered, the product. Cars that weren't just functional, but exciting. Designs that made people turn their heads again. Innovation that actually connected with customers. Slowly, Nissan started regaining what it had lost, its identity. And the results? Unbelievable. Within just a couple of years, Nissan went from billions in losses to billions in profit. A complete turnaround. One of the most dramatic comebacks in corporate history, from the brink of bankruptcy back to global dominance. But maybe the biggest lesson here isn't about cars at all. It's about what happens when success makes you comfortable, when you stop listening, when you forget what made you great in the first place, and how sometimes it takes an outsider to remind you who you really are. Now, I want to ask you, do you think Nissan would have survived without Carlos Ghosn, or was its downfall already irreversible at that point? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us, even giants can fall, but the right move can bring them back to life.